Imagine you met a man who told you he was a Tibetan lama. And not just that, a trained surgeon who could see a disease in your aura months before it appeared. And on top of all that, a prisoner of war who survived torture that sounds almost impossible. Well, today we're diving into the autobiography of just such a man, Lobsang Rampa. His life story is one of the most incredible, most fantastic you'll probably ever hear. We're going to trace his journey from the sacred temples of Tibet all the way to the battlefields of World War II. So where does this story even begin? It starts with a claim that is, well, it's pretty out there. Rampa says he was born with the ability to see the human aura, this field of colored light that he says surrounds every single person. And for him, this wasn't some vague feeling. He describes it like reading a book. He could look at the colors swirling around you and know your health, your secrets, your deepest hopes and fears.
And this is where it gets really crucial. Rampa didn't see this as some kind of magic. No, he believed it was a natural sense, one that could totally revolutionize medicine. He claimed he could see things like cancer in the aura months before any physical symptoms showed up, which would make cures basically infallible. But, and this is a huge but, he says that Western doctors just dismissed him, called his ideas nonsense, and right there, that's the core conflict of his whole story. A man who believes he has miraculous knowledge living in a world that just refuses to listen.
To really get a handle on this guy, we've got to go back, way back to the beginning. Rampa claims he was born into the Tibetan aristocracy, part of a top-tier family in the capital city of Lhasa. By all accounts, he should have had a life of power and influence, but as we're about to see, fate had a much harder path laid out for him.
You know, the turning point in his life, the moment that basically locked in his future, happened when he was just 7 years old. In Tibet, his entire life was mapped out by the chief astrologer. And the prophecy was incredibly specific. He would train to become a priest-surgeon. But it came with this really heavy warning. His life would be filled with immense suffering and hardship. As Rampa himself writes, knowing what's coming does not make it any easier when one knows all that one is to suffer.
So, his journey eventually takes him way far from home. As a young man, Rampa leaves the isolated ancient world of Tibet and heads to Chungking, China to continue his medical studies. Now, for a monk who had only ever known the quiet, spiritual life of Lhasa, this was like stepping onto another planet. And the culture shock hit him instantly. I mean, in Tibet, if you wanted to cross a river, you'd use a simple little boat made of yak skin. But in China, he saw his first automobile. He actually called it a roaring demon that moved without being pulled by any animals. The sight was so shocking, it sent his entire group and their horses into a total panic. And at this, it wasn't just the high-tech stuff. Even the most basic, everyday things were completely alien to him. He'd spent his whole life sitting comfortably on the floor in the lotus position. So when he was introduced to a simple wooden chair, what was his reaction? He called it an abominable contraption, an instrument of torture. To him, being propped up off the ground like that just felt totally unnatural. And the list of these modern wonders just keeps on going. A spring bed creaked and groaned so much he was sure he was going to fall right through the floor. A simple water faucet was like a miracle, just water coming out of a piece of metal. And a bicycle, to him, it was this totally weird iron frame that just zipped past him, almost like magic. But here's the thing, his education wasn't just about Western medicine. Back in Tibet, his training went deep into metaphysical subjects, the kind of esoteric, secret knowledge that was totally hidden from the rest of the world. So, one of the big skills he says he mastered was something called astral travel. Now, what is that? It's basically the idea that your spirit, your consciousness, can actually leave your physical body. According to him, his astral self could go anywhere, pass right through walls, and watch events unfold from far away. And he doesn't just talk about it, he actually lays out a step-by-step guide. It involves deep relaxation, really vivid visualization, and always being aware of this silver cord that connects you back to your body. But he warns there's one unbreakable rule. Your motives have to be absolutely pure. If you try to use this for selfish reasons, he says it's just doomed to fail. As if that wasn't enough, his stories of actual physical exploration are just as incredible. He describes joining this expedition into the remote Changtong highlands of Tibet, and he claims that there they found a hidden valley containing a perfectly preserved city from a lost civilization. A city built for giants, frozen solid in the clear ice of a glacier.
And this discovery, he claims, ties into the secret, epic history of our entire planet. Rampa says that deep in secret tunnels beneath the Patala Palace, he saw ancient records. These records told of a rogue planet that almost crushed into Earth, but instead it ripped off a huge chunk that became our moon. And in the massive cataclysm that followed, a low-lying seaside area was violently thrust thousands of feet into the air, creating the high plateau of Tibet.
Okay, so now we have to turn to the darkest chapter of his story. This is where that astrologer's prophecy of suffering becomes terrifyingly real. After training to be a pilot for the Chinese Air Force, Rampa's plane gets shot down, and he's captured by the Japanese during the Second Sino-Japanese War. What happened next was, well, it was a descent into a living hell. He was moved from one Japanese prisoner of war camp to another, and he says he faced just unimaginable brutality. All of it was designed to break his spirit and force him to give up military secrets. And the details in his book they're really graphic. He describes tortures like having bamboo slivers shoved under his fingernails, to having his body forcibly filled with water until he was on the verge of literally bursting. It was just relentless, calculated cruelty. So the big question is, how could anyone possibly survive this? Well, he says he fell back on this mental discipline that his Lama guide had taught him. The technique was to completely refuse to focus on the source of the pain. By controlling his mind, by forcing his thoughts somewhere else, he claims he was able to endure agony that would have broken anyone else. And he never betrayed his allies. His will to live was just off the charts. In one of his escape attempts, he played dead so convincingly that the guards just threw his body onto a pile of corpses. He says he lay there for hours, surrounded by death, just waiting for the cover of darkness to make his move and slip away. So after all these captures, these betrayals, these recaptures, the story of his life in Asia starts to reach its climax. There's this one quote from his guide that just perfectly sums up the whole theme of the book. All of his suffering, it wasn't random, it wasn't meaningless. It was like a trial by fire, a process designed to temper his spirit for some greater purpose that he hadn't even fulfilled yet. And this is pretty much where the book's main narrative leaves us. After surviving a firing squad and making one last desperate trek to the coast, he finds an empty fishing boat. He just pushes off into the open sea with no food, no water, and no idea where he's going. For the moment, he's free, but his journey is obviously far, far from over. So you have this unbelievable tale of mystical powers, of lost worlds, of just superhuman endurance. But it all comes down to this huge question, one that his own teachers posed to him, and one that later on private investigators would look into. Is this the true history of a remarkable man? Or is it all, as the lamas might say, just a journey through a world of illusion? That right there is the mystery of Lobsang Rampa.